Welcome to Backwards Crime, where real stories are uncovered by starting at the ending and following the truth into the past. Diane Downs sat quietly as the sentence was read. The courtroom was still, the kind of silence that comes only after every argument has been exhausted. The jury's decision had been accepted in full. Diane Downs was sentenced to life in prison, with additional years attached, ensuring she would remain confined for decades. The ruling was final, the outcome permanent. The verdict closed the legal chapter of a case that had already reshaped multiple lives. For Diane, it marked the end of freedom. For her surviving children, it confirmed something else entirely, that what happened to them was not random, not accidental, and not the result of an unknown threat. It was the validation of a truth that had taken years to surface. Christie Downs, Diane's eldest surviving daughter, testified at trial. Young but precise, she described the night without embellishment or emotional appeal. Her account directly contradicted the story her mother had repeated from the beginning. The danger, Christie explained, did not come from outside the vehicle. It came from the driver's seat. Medical evidence reinforced her testimony. One child did not survive. The others were left with permanent injuries. Doctors explained the trauma in clinical terms. Investigators outlined contradictions in Diane's statements. Forensic experts walked the jury through bullet trajectories and wound placement that did not support the claim of an unknown attacker. Diane maintained her version of events for as long as she could, presenting herself as a mother caught in an unpredictable nightmare. But under scrutiny, the story collapsed. The facts refused to bend. When the judge finished reading the sentence, Diane was escorted from the courtroom. There was no outburst, no visible collapse, only a slow exit, watched by those who had spent years reconstructing what had actually happened. The case was over, but understanding it required looking backward. Long before the conviction, Diane had already drawn scrutiny. Investigators questioned her behavior in the hours after the incident. Hospital staff noted emotional responses that didn't align with the situation. Law enforcement documented contradictions, sometimes within the same conversation. Public sympathy came easily at first. Media coverage portrayed Diane as a survivor of a roadside attack, a wounded mother, injured children, a senseless act. But as details emerged, the narrative shifted. The more information surfaced, the less her story made sense. Behind the scenes, detectives worked methodically. Phone records, timelines, medical reports. Interviews with friends, co-workers, and family. Patterns emerged, not just about the night itself, but about Diane's behavior over time. Her need for attention, her tendency to reshape reality, her refusal to accept responsibility. By the time the case reached trial, the question was no longer what happened, but why the original story had been told at all. The conviction wasn't the beginning of clarity, it was the confirmation. As Diane began her sentence, the legal system closed its file. But the story didn't end there. To understand how it reached this point, it had to be traced backward, through the investigation, the night itself, and the patterns that existed long before any crime scene. Because the ending only made sense once the past came into focus. The story that wouldn't hold. The conviction forced every earlier moment into new light. Before the courtroom and verdict, there were hospital rooms, interviews, and conversations that now felt unsettling. At the hospital, Diane spoke freely with police and medical staff. She described a sudden roadside attack by a stranger, claiming randomness and violence with no warning. She framed herself as brave, injured while trying to protect her children. But concerns surfaced quickly. Medical staff observed that Diane appeared unusually calm. Her attention often shifted away from her children and toward herself. She smiled at inappropriate moments and spoke easily with reporters. Individually, these observations meant little. Together, they raised concern. Investigators documented inconsistencies almost immediately. Diane's description of the attacker changed. Details about location, timing, and movement failed to stay consistent. Her arm injury didn't align with her explanation. Forensic analysis later suggested it was self-inflicted. Christie and Danny remained hospitalized for extended periods. Christie suffered a stroke, but remained mentally aware. Danny sustained injuries that permanently affected his mobility. As Christie's ability to communicate returned, investigators approached carefully. When she finally spoke, her memory was clear. There was no stranger. Her mother stopped the car, turned around, and fired. Her account was calm and unembellished. Not accusation, but recollection. Everything changed. The investigation shifted inward. Ballistics confirmed Christie's account. Angles and trajectories matched. Diane's story no longer fit the facts. Detectives expanded their focus to Diane's personal life. A recent breakup, frustration with motherhood, open statements about wanting a different life. What once sounded like venting now appeared as motive. Public perception shifted. Media scrutiny replaced sympathy. Diane's composed demeanor and frequent appearances no longer reassured. They unsettled. By the time charges were filed, the case had already unraveled backward. What first appeared as a random act was now understood as something rooted in familiarity, proximity, and long-standing behavior. This was not a sudden transformation. It was a trajectory, patterns before the night. Looking further back, Diane's life revealed instability that felt impossible to ignore.
She struggled with relationships, responsibility, and emotional balance. Outwardly functional, she was employed and confident. Beneath the surface, patterns repeated. Friends described her as charming, but self-centered. She craved validation and reacted poorly when denied. Attention, particularly from men, mattered deeply. At the time of the incident, a romantic relationship had ended. The man didn't want children. Diane expressed resentment toward motherhood, openly framing her children as obstacles rather than responsibilities. Financial stress added pressure. Employment was inconsistent. Rather than adapting, Diane externalized blame. Psychological evaluations later revealed emotional detachment and manipulation. She adapted her behavior to fit her audience, masking deeper issues. Her parenting reflected this instability. Moments of affection, followed by emotional neglect. Inconsistency became the norm. Seen in reverse, the incident wasn't isolated. It was the result of years of avoidance, resentment, and entitlement. Obstacles weren't problems to solve, they were barriers to remove. The shape of becoming. Looking further back into adolescence, patterns were already forming. Diane was intelligent and articulate, but emotionally distant. She wanted approval without reciprocity. Rejection triggered frustration. Impulsivity appeared early. Mood shifts were noticeable. Praise stabilized her. Criticism destabilized her. She learned to deflect blame and rewrite circumstances to protect her self-image. Her home life lacked emotional warmth. Validation was sought externally. Control became central, often through subtle manipulation rather than confrontation. Relationships were intense but unstable. When vulnerability was required, she withdrew. When attention faded, resentment followed. Psychologists later identified adolescence as formative. Diane never developed tools to process disappointment or accountability. Instead, she learned presentation. By adulthood, these traits were embedded. Adolescence wasn't a turning point. It was the foundation. And before that, there was childhood. Where emotional wiring begins, patterns take root, and coping mechanisms quietly form. If you want to uncover more stories like Diane Downs's and see crimes unfold in reverse, like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode of Backwards Crime. Thanks for watching.